Ladies, gentlemen, and Spiritborn of all ages, this class is absolutely phenomenal. I'm not even just talking about pure damage, because we all know that Spiritborn is pretty bugged in genuinely exponentially increasing ways that just make it absolutely absurd with perfect gear. But with the fact that people are clearing pit tier 145 or even higher as Spiritborn, leaves room to just be fiddled with and of course to have fun. Because while there is the side of the game that is just hard pit pushing to higher tiers, a lot of people will not be engaging with that as much as they will be just speed farming and power fantasy. I've been a big fan of Quill Volley as a skill for a while. It was the thing that I first built around in the Advanced Access Review build. It was our leveling build, our mid-game build, and then when I went off to mess with and continually improve the Evade build archetype, a new tech was discovered, I believe by Goblin Inc., who is just an awesome theory crafter and build creator, though I've also seen this used by Rob and Makuna as well. So not certain who found it first exactly, but it is quite special. This tech then simply lets you just overpower with every single hit on an already guaranteed crit build, creating a really lovely synergy of just orange numbers popping up all over your screen doing purely insane amounts of damage. This is the basis of all of the ridiculously high-end pit tier builds, but that requires a somewhat insane gear requirement to actually reach. Instead, I wanted to do three main things. Give you guys an overpower Quill Volley build, because it's just such a cool thing to be able to achieve in combat. Make it more relevant to the average player, and so this can speed farm a 105 pit in right around 5 minutes or less without any real danger even in my relatively far from perfect gear. Then thirdly, I wanted to finally find a home for the Soar boots and the Vortex synergies with it. The true beauty of a class, and especially a build archetype, being super overtuned is that if you aren't trying to reach the absolute peak it can achieve, if you're not specifically pit pushing, you can remove some parts that add damage or defense and replace them instead with fun and comfort. And this build is so strong that you won't even notice the fact that it's lower damage than the others or survivability unless you try to push pit tiers to an absolute absurd amount, which most players again simply just have no interest in ever doing past upgrading your glyphs to level 100, which this can easily do as there's just no incentive to do past that. That said, today is an overpower Quill Volley build with an absurd amount of focus on Vortex, the skill that pulls enemies in towards you in a radius around you. Like, we don't just have this on our skill bar as a skill, we also have it as a rune word that triggers every 6 times that we hit enemies with our Quill Volley. Then we also have it tied to cast Vortex whenever we use Soar. We then also replace our Evade with Soar, which has multiple charges and reduces its cooldown with every hit. So now we just every time we evade, we pull everything in nearby, we have lots of evades, then we start attacking, and then we pull even more things in nearby as a result. Timing's not to your satisfaction, you can then press the skill which is on your bar just because we can, and because the cooldown is really low due to the resetting shenanigans that we've got going on. In open world content like Helltide or wave clear focus content like Infernal Hordes, this is absolutely hilarious because you can just zoom through an area, picking up every enemy that is close to you, then firing off a single Quill Volley that's enough to actually destroy them and kill them, like an F1 car with a heavy duty vacuum on the side of it that pulls everything in and just has grenades inside of it too for no particular reason. On top of that, this also means that we have multiple charges of a teleport style evade, so just general traversal around the world is made quite simple as well, especially like in dungeons. If you want to go through a wall or something, Soar is great for that. The only thing really is that to get this going, there is a gear requirement, but I will try to simplify that as much as possible as well to make this as accessible as I can. So let's break down the skill tree and why we pick what we do, the spirit hall choices that we make, the uniques, the legendaries, the stats in general that you want for your gear, the gems, the rune words, your mercenary choices, and your Paragon board too, before just a little bit onto actually how to play the build. First things first then, let's talk about your skill tree. We don't actively use a basic skill, so you basically just want to shove 2 points into the first cluster wherever you want so that you can unlock cores. Then we'll be taking all of the 5 ranks of Quill Volley as well as its enhancement and also advantageous Quill Volley. Altogether, what this does is fire out a massive pile of feathers in an arced cone in front of you. This makes enemies vulnerable, and each successive feather does more damage, meaning if you hit one enemy with 3 feathers, it does more overall damage than hitting 3 different enemies with 1 feather each. This pushes you towards a sort of shotgun range style being the best, where you want to be right up in every enemy's face, which is of course a very lovely synergy with our Vortex focus pulling enemies in on top of us anyways. We then also are going to be grabbing a bunch of passives within this cluster too, and this build being what it is, I will show you my choices, but note that these will adjust based on your gear and what content you are doing too, and I'll mention where and how. We take 3 points in follow through then for bonus basic skill damage doubled on the 3rd cast in a row. This is essentially our lowest priority damage increase passive on the tree. If you want the skill points for another thing that I recommend later, this is the best spot that I would take them out of if you had to choose one. Next, we put 2 points into the vigorous passive passive for bonus resource generation after casting a core skill. If you don't have a 50% roll Midnight Sun Ring and your ring temper resource generation is a bit lacking too, you may well need the third point in here for all 3 ranks, but once those other 2 things are sorted, 2 points here does the job just fine. Then we're going to be taking 3 ranks of the Balanced Exertion passive for bonus core skill damage, but the cost of extra resource per cast, but this doesn't affect us because it just does not interact with Kepaleke in any way. We only get the bonus damage, which is quite good. Moving on to focus skills, then we'll be picking up Vortex itself, as well as its enhancement, and then also Measured Vortex. As a whole, this gives us a fairly large area of effect pull that does bonus damage and knocks enemies down when we have a barrier on, which we will permanently. Also, this increases the damage of your next skill cast after using it, which is pretty useful too, especially considering how often that we use it. After that, we're going to be picking up Ravager, as well as its enhancement, and also Measured Ravager. This gives all attacks a secondary hit of damage while active, increases its own duration when you get a kill, and importantly increases resource generation for you by 30%, which is extremely useful. Passively, it also keeps you at a minimum of 2 ferocity stacks, which is pretty useful too. Speaking of passive, we take 1 rank of the Focal Point passive over here, mostly just as a gateway for 3 ranks of Apex, which gives us bonus damage against vulnerable enemies that is doubled against elites and bosses. There's also the Diminishment passive over here, which I don't have any points in here because we are just so tanky from the rest of our kit that this extra 15% potential damage reduction is simply unnecessary. If you do find yourself having survival problems though, this is a good place to invest some points into to try and fix it. Then we take 1 rank of Mirage, which gives us dodge chance while evading and crit chance after a dodge, but this is mostly just as a gateway for 3 ranks of Unrestrained Power. This gives us a bunch of bonus damage while we are unstoppable or unhindered. We are permanently unstoppable, so this is permanently active. After this, we have the defensive skill cluster as well. Here I've been picking up 3 ranks of Armored Hide, as well as its enhancement, and also Reinforced Armored Hide. Altogether, this gives us a bonus 100% block chance while it's active. It activates Unstoppable. It gives us 400 Thorns, it's just a bit of a bonus. It sets our resolve stacks to its maximum, which is very important for this build, and then it also gives us block damage reduction per close enemy too. As for why specifically 3 ranks in this skill, that's just where my cooldowns line up that I can have this consistently active because of the way it works. If you have a greater affix on cooldown reduction on either the unique ring or on your helmet instead, then you can lower this and instead move the points to a different place on the skill tree, but 3 ranks is correct with my current stats. Then we're going to be grabbing Counterattack as our next ability, its enhancement, and also Reinforced Counterattack. This skill does not go on our bar. You do not want to actually press it, so essentially pretend the active part doesn't exist. Instead, it functions to give us passive dodge chance, a retaliation hit when we successfully dodge, and most importantly, it gives you a passive increase to crit damage permanently per enemy that is close to you. Normally, you would need this to be on your bar to activate the passive effects and the enhancements, but our unique ring activates the passive of this, which also means that the enhancements work too. I should also stop to note here and be very specific that it's important, very much so, that we do not have this skill in our bar and that you do not press it actively. The active part of the skill gives you 100% dodge chance. Dodge as a stat takes priority over block as a stat. So with 100% dodge chance, you would never block. Blocking gives us a massive damage increase for a short duration afterwards thanks to one of our legendary aspects, so that's the main reason why we just wouldn't use this. We then also take Scourge as a skill, its enhancement, and then also Adaptive Scourge. As a whole, this releases a pulse of poison damage around you that slows and fears enemies that are hit. Each hit it deals, as with the poison damage, also increases your damage against crowd-controlled enemies up to 50 stacks for a maximum 50% bonus. Then you also get a lucky hit chance to heal 35% of the damage that you deal to any enemy that is affected by this skill. We can keep enemies permanently affected by Scourge, which means that we just have permanently active, incredibly strong lifesteal to take care of our raw regen necessities. Then we'll be taking 1 rank of the Endurance passive for a little bit of vigor gained when we use a defensive skill, mostly just as a gateway for 3 ranks of Perseverance. We have a very heavy focus in this build on stacking maximum resolve, so this just gained us a ton of damage reduction as a result of that. Worth stopping here as well to mention that the Patient Guard passive here that I don't get gives you 10% block chance. This is a flat 10%, it does not increase per rank, so you can't get it like 30% with 3 ranks, just the first rank is quite good for that block chance. So if, for example, you hit the cooldown breakpoints I mentioned before to remove a point from Armored Hide, this is one of the places that you can stick 1 point in to get a fair bit of more damage. For survivability instead, we actually don't reach maximum resistances in this setup until you get some pretty specific masterworking done. And before you raise your pitchforks, we just don't need it. The rest of the build is strong and tanky enough to easily float through a tier 100 or further pit run without a hint of danger, even without capped resistances, even far from capped resistances. That said, if you do run into some sort of survivability issues, if you feel like you're dying, or if you want to scale up and do harder content, then you can put some points into the anti-venom passive here for bonus poison resistance and maximum poison resist too, assuming that poison resist is one of the places that you need more. Then we move on to the potency cluster, and here we're just going to be taking passives through ranks of resilient for bonus maximum life after casting a gorilla skill, and while this is definitely important, it also has a massive offensive impact, mostly due to the scaling of a certain Paragon bug that we'll be talking about later. But maximum life is essentially damage increase for us. That's what you need to know for now. We take 3 ranks of the Brilliance passive for bonus eagle skill damage dependent on your movement speed stat, and then, well, not really efficient if you have bonus skill points from the changes that I mentioned earlier and you just want to lean into the fun side of things that we go through with Soar and Vortex. You can take ranks in actually the acceleration passive up here, which also gives you a bonus evade charge per rank that you spend. This means a bonus Soar and a bonus Vortex with the combo for each rank, and then we take 3 ranks of Potent over here for a stacking increasing debuff that you put on an enemy every time they are hit by a Jaguar skill, increasing your damage against them. This is triggered by Ravager's bonus hits, it's triggered by counterattacks, dodge retaliations, and, well, also by every single one of our skills, because we are using Jaguar main Spirit Hall, which makes all of our skills count as Jaguar skills to begin with. We also take 3 ranks of Furnace over here for the same primary Spirit Hall reason, as just it gives it a bunch of crit damage with Jaguar skills, and crit damage multipliers are one of our main ways of scaling damage within this setup as a whole. Moving on, then, we of course have our ultimate skill cluster, and here we're going to be picking up the Hunter as well as its enhancements, and there are 3 main reasons for this one. The bonus damage to injured enemies buff being active after using this is quite good. The Ferocity Overfill effect, which also means bonus attack speed and crit damage after using the ult, is great, and the fact that it has a chance of resetting itself when you get a kill with it active lets you use it pretty frequently, especially outside of boss fights, and that pairs very well with our passives in the cluster too. 3 ranks of Resolution for bonus damage to elites after you use an ultimate skill, doubled against solo enemies, which mostly just means bosses. 3 ranks of Spiritual Attunement for 30 bonus maximum resource, and then 3 ranks of Supremacy for a stacking damage buff that increases every time you get a kill with an ultimate skill active, then default just gives you 5 stacks when the ultimate skill ends, before starting to slowly diminish until you cast an ultimate again. The Hunter lets us take advantage of the end part of that with the bonus stacks on ultimate ending, and the frequent resets help us maintain this buff at higher stacks too. Then for your final point, we have Prodigy's Tempo, our key passive. This gives us ranks to all skills after you cast 3 basic skills in a row, and gives us a reduction to all cooldowns whenever you cast 3 cores or potency skills in a row. With Rod of Kepaleke, which we are using, core skills count as basic skills, which means that Quill Volley has both skill tags and thus activates both effects of this after every 3 uses of the skill in a row. This is very natural to do in the general gameplay loop for this build. There's no thought required, and it gives you massive power gained. That's the skill tree then, so let's move on to our Spirit Hall choices. Here we'll be taking primary Jaguar Spirit choice, partially because it can be a fairly large damage increase. Honestly, I regularly have this hit for tens of billions, sometimes hundreds, because it stacks up all the damage that you've done over half a second and then deals 15% of it in a singular burst. We also attack fast enough that this skill triggers just extremely frequently, but the main reason that we have this is that it adds the Jaguar skill tag to our Eagle skills, letting us take advantage of the Jaguar specific passives despite our main damage coming from an Eagle skill. We then secondarily take the Gorilla Spirit here for the bonus maximum resolve stacks more than anything else, as resolve scales both our damage and survivability a fairly large amount. With that covered again, let's talk about our uniques for the build, and I'll start by saying that I'm using a mythic unique that is a touch more than a slot swap to fix. It's important to our overall setup, and while you can use the build without it, and I will explain how, it just makes it a much easier thing to achieve once you have the helmet, and this is Shaco, the Harlequin Crest. This gives us enough armor that we can focus on our resistances and other places. It gives us bonus maximum resource, which not only helps us breach the breakpoint that we have to hit for that, but also every point of maximum resource, even above that, is a sizable damage increase due to the main functionality of the build and how it works. The cooldown reduction stat is of course fantastic too. The maximum life, as mentioned earlier, scales our damage through a Paragon bug, which is very hefty, which may be fixed at some point, but it isn't right now, so we may as well be using it. Then the just 20% damage reduction and +4 ranks to all skills is incredible in itself as well. For greater affix priority and Masterworking 2, you want 1 Masterworking roll on armor specifically, just to help you hit your cap, but the ideal greater affixes and other Masterworking procs resource would all be on maximum resource gained. That said, if you don't have this and still want to play the build, the best replacement would actually just be a regular legendary helmet rather than a unique, specifically one with the duelist aspect, which increases your maximum ferocity stacks, increasing our attack speed and crit damage potential. But the main reason for this is the stats you can get on a legendary helmet are better than most uniques for this build, other than the Harlequin crest. Specifically, you want a boost to maximum life, an armor roll, which you would need to hit the cap without Shaco, and then most importantly, bonus maximum resource can roll as a stat on helmets too. And again, we do just have a breakpoint of maximum resource to make the build exist in the first place. On a helmet then, you would want the same tempers as I have on my pants, which is bonus maximum resolve stacks and then barrier generation as well. As for the rest of our uniques then, we've got the Rod of Kepaleke as our weapon, which is unbelievably important to the whole functionality of the setup, and of course to the damage too. It is 100% required. The most important stats on this weapon are maximum resource and then the unique effect itself. The difference between a 2% roll and a 3% roll on the effect is insanely large with how well this scales with bonus max resource, so it's not something that you can ignore even a little bit. And again, maximum resource is both a part of hitting a breakpoint and also increases your damage an absurd amount per extra point compared to even other maximum resource builds, mostly due to the way that Kepaleke works and its own effects. Then we have our next main hint of the build, which is the Banished Lord's Talisman. This is what causes us to overpower with every hit, and it also gives us % maximum life gained as an affix, which we can stack to gain a ton of damage from the Paragon bug that we'll be talking about later. But for now, at least, this affix is also both the ideal greater affix and a masterworking proc, but this is equally as important as the unique effect itself being at a high roll. This item is the reason that I keep saying there's a breakpoint for maximum resources as a stat in the build, and that breakpoint is 275. This will cause every single quill volley that you cast to be a guaranteed overpower, on top of already being a guaranteed crit, which does the obscene damage, and that's why you see the constant orange numbers, because this is also taking advantage of the bonus multiplier from this item as well. From passives, we get 30 bonus maximum resource. From purely Paragon glyph management, you can get around 94 bonus, which puts us up to 224 total. A non-greater affix Kepaleke can roll with as high as 24 bonus maximum resource. Masterworking upgrades, even just getting the 4 and 8 proc on it, would put that at around 43 as a bonus, which then puts us up to 267 already. Helmet slot, either being legendary with this affix on it too, is 14 for a high roll, with again just the 4 and 8 procs of Masterworking brings us up to around 25 bonus maximum resource, again even without a greater affix, which then would bring us up to 292 maximum resource from all of those sources combined. There's also the Elixir of Resourcefulness, which is fairly cheap to craft this season, and this gives you a bonus 25 maximum resource as well, and that is the combo that gets you above the 275 maximum resource requirement. The thing is, technically the requirement is actually 241 really. Banished Lord's Talisman calculates the skill's resource cost as a factor, even though Kepaleke makes it technically cost 0 for us, meaning that it adds 34 to the resource that you spend as a result of this interaction. This obviously gets a lot easier to reach if you have the Harlequin crest over just a legendary helmet, as it has a higher roll on the maximum resource stat by default, not to mention the possibility of greater affix rolls, because I did not actually include greater affix rolls in any of that calculation just to show you that you don't need them. The weapon can also be greater affix rolled too, and I didn't include the possibility of the third masterworking proc either on any of this, because it's hard to focus getting 3 masterworking procs on the same stat, whereas 2 is at least achievable, but you can do that, and if you do, it will just make you do so much more damage. I wanted to explain how you can reach the breakpoint without investing half your left testicle to get there, so I hope I've done that reasonably well, but if you do hit these further bonuses as well, the damage will just skyrocket in this build extremely quickly, because every point of maximum resource matters a lot for your overall damage. Then our next unique in the build is the Ring of Midnight Sun. The main thing that you want this is a unique roll as close to maximum as possible, even if the item itself isn't ancestral. This gives us up to 50% of the resource that we spent in the last 2 seconds back whenever we have a critical hit. We crit constantly, especially due to the Rod of Kepaleke, so we get the extra resource back if you have a high enough roll on this effect and enough resource generation beside it, which we do have in the build. Then you will spend your full max resource with every quill volley that you throw out because of Kepaleke, and it will instantly refund it entirely because Kepaleke is also a forced crit interacting with this ring. So every single hit will consume and refund your full maximum resource, which not only means that we'll get the Kepaleke bonuses every time, but also that it will trigger Banished Lords with every hit too, hence the permanent orange numbers against enemies of any actual consequence. If you are choosing between greater affixes, again a 50% roll on the unique effect is much more important than even having a greater affix on it, but the priority is crit damage above cooldown reduction, then dexterity, with Masterworking affixes being the exact same priority. Then we have our final unique for the build, which is Scorn of the Earth, the boots. This is what replaces our evade with Soar, which is honestly just a pretty fun concept. It also makes our Soar give us barrier, which is useful for engaging in a fight, increases Soar's damage and skill ranks, and then just gives a nice pile of bonus movement speed, which then translates to a bonus to damage due to the Brilliance passive in our skill tree. As well, this has a fun double implicit affix on it, both giving you bonus evade charges and also reducing evade cooldown with each attack. This lets us use a evade a little bit more actively, and with our evade being Soar and our Soar casting Vortex, this lets us group up enemies very consistently and purposefully as well. Then we have our Legendaries in the few slots that remain as such. We have the Moonrise aspect on our ring slot for bonus attack speed and basic skill damage, which does of course affect Quill Volley. Then on the ring itself we have Dexterity, Maximum Life, and Attack Speed as the affixes, with attack speed being the main priority for Masterworking and greater affix procs. You want the attack speed. For tempers, you want overpower damage ideally, just because it is the highest rolling additive damage temper in this slot that affects our Quill Volley every hit. Then the pure resource generation in the other slot to help the Ring of Midnight Sun and our gameplay loop in general. Then we have our gloves with the redirecting force aspect. This is a massive damage scaler for Spiritborn in general. This gives us a crit damage multiplier dependent on block chance. We know from before the expansion release that this effect was intended to be capped when you reach 100% block chance, which would mean at a maximum it would be a 70% damage increase in this slot up to 140% when you actually get a successful block, of course. That's still a nutty amount for an offensive aspect slot, but this is also taking an influence from block sources that put you above 100%. So Armored Hide puts us at 100% block chance, but we also have default block chance from using a quarterstaff that stacks on top of that for the conversion effect, and then we also have another aspect that will funnel massively into this too. But first, the stats on your glove should be bonus ranks to Quill Volley as the highest priority, both for greater affixes and for Masterworking procs. Armor is your other stat, and then ideally attack speed, though I've got maximum life on mine, attack speed is better. For tempers, you want more overpower damage, not basic skill like I have here, and you want vortex size increase to simply let you pull things in from further away whenever we proc or actively use vortex, which happens constantly, and it just makes it a lot more comfortable and more effective. Then we have our defensive slots too, and on the pants I have interdiction, which says that it's a defensive aspect, but it's not really for us. This increases your block chance per stack of resolve that you have. We stack maximum resolve as a stat to hit crazy high amounts of it, and this all translates into bonus block chance as a result. All of the bonus block chance then translates into a bunch of bonus crit damage due to the offensive aspect we just talked about, and this combo is just relentlessly strong together. It's worth noting in all of my footage, I don't even have maximum rolls on either the redirected force or interdiction aspects because I've just not had the luck to find them, but these two aspects, if maxed out, would give me ridiculously stronger damage than I currently have. So there is a ton of growth potential in this, even from my own personal setup. As for the affixes then, basic skill ranks is massive and ideal for greater affix, then maximum life increase and an armor roll as well. For tempering, you want bonus ranks to maximum resolve stacks, which is by far your goal for Masterworking 2 here on this slot, and then just barrier generation as your other temper, which mainly is to help us maintain 100% of our maximum life as barrier as much as possible. Then for our chest slot, we have the turbulence aspect, and this is what makes our Soar cast Vortex as well. The fun part of this is it casts it before you land from the Soar, so you basically arrive in an already collected pile of enemies. For the stats on this one, you would want armor, maximum life, and then actually all element resistance is ideal here. You'd only really need one roll of this anywhere on your gear. Again, even with like 10 to 20% on some of my resistances, I'm totally capable of running through a pit tier 100 plus without dying in this setup, but more resistances is more consistency and the ability to push into even higher content if you want to do so while using this setup. So this is a very good place to put this stat in. If you have Shaco like I do as well, you can instead change out the armor roll on the chest for being dexterity instead for a bit of bonus damage and general stats too, because Shaco just has a much higher armor roll than you can get on a natural legendary helmet. For tempers, again on the chest, what you would want is maximum resolve stacks, which makes this the ideal spot for all Masterworking procs, again for the damage and survivability increase that this gives us. Then some more barrier generation once again. Past that we have our Runewords and our gem slots in the build too. For the gems in your jewelry, you'll want to fill whatever your biggest hole is survivability wise. I have armor cap, so I have gone full resistances in my jewelry with full diamonds. If you find yourself in your own gear with lots of resist but low armor for whatever reason, you may instead want to have some skulls in your jewelry, but this is the ideal set up once you've got the right gear for the build. For armor gem slots, you want Amethyst for barrier generation increase, as barrier generation just changes the amount of barrier that we can have from our one source of proper barrier gain, and that actually has to do with our first runeword as well, Q. For every 300 maximum resource that we spend, we trigger Earthen Bulwark from Druid for a maximum life scaling barrier effect. The barrier generation that we get is entirely for the purpose of trying to take this barrier and making it scale to cover 100% of our maximum life with every time that it procs, especially as 300% maximum resource spent is just a fancy way of saying, for us, 3 Quill Volley casts, so we are super frequently reapplying this massive barrier to ourselves, which is extremely strong. Then our other runeword is Zol Cry. This makes it so every 2 times that we invoke a skill from another class, so Earthen Bulwark, we gain Offering. Then when this triggers, it does our Vortex skill for free, including our skill tree upgrades for the skill because we are Spiritborn and that's how these interact. With our current rate of triggering Bulwark, this means every 6 Quill Volley attacks, we do a free Vortex, which really ties the whole combination together on the Vortex side of things too. Vortex on Soar so we can pull when we enter a pack, Vortex every 6 hits which pulls in stragglers, knocks everything down, and gives us a slight damage bump to our next attack, and Vortex just being manually cast from our bar as well as an option. The extra part of this is it also gives us a ton of stagger buildup on bosses, as the pull and knockdown effect both help build the bar. If you don't really want to go full leaning into Vortex synergies with this, you can instead use the rune that gives you bonus maximum life, as that does of course funnel into the bug that we'll be talking about on the Paragon board. Before moving on to the final stage then, I want to briefly touch on elixirs and incense when using the build, especially as they are actually pretty easy to chain craft at this point this season specifically, once you reach Torment 4 at least, and engage with the endgame at that difficulty. The elixir of resourcefulness is unbelievably important. We talked about this earlier. It gives you 25 max resource. It is just incredible for us whether you've reached the breakpoint or not. You want this active at any point that you physically can. Then with your 3 incense slots, you can do a lot to just shore up any holes that you have in either your armor, your resistances, your stats for Paragon nodes. I wouldn't bother with this if you're doing like open world content or Helltide, Infernal Hordes, Nightmare Dungeons, things like that, but if you're doing something like pushing higher pit tiers, this can help you out a fair bit. Otherwise, it's just sort of unnecessary. Then quickly, we also have our Mercenaries. We're here going down the right side path through the 15% all resistance gain passive that helps us a fair bit with our survival, and this culminates in a passive at the bottom that will give us a couple of different potential damage multipliers based on what he does. If you manage to reach your resistance caps without this specific thing counted in, you may want to go the other direction instead for 15% armor gained, and then still some more actual options for multipliers to your damage. The choice between these 2 trees is basically depending on whether you're lacking armor or resistances more. For your reinforcement then, we'll instead be going with Variana, and we'll be taking Bloodthirst as her reinforcement skill, just for a little bit of occasional bonus attack speed. Finally then, for actually putting this whole thing together, let's talk about our Paragon board for this setup, and especially this season moving forward. This is less of a precise art to actually be able to explain. I am not at Paragon 300 yet. I don't expect anyone to be at Paragon 300, and that means that every player is assumed to just have a different number of Paragon points from each other. So basically, I'll show you what my board looks like, where I've got my points, and if you had the exact number of points that I do and you want to directly copy it, go ahead. But I'll be explaining the important parts vocally and talking about where you could save some points or where you might want to spend them if you have more than I currently do. Starting with the starting board then, we're going to be grabbing both rare nodes at the bottom and the magic nodes around them too that specifically give maximum life. If you are under armor cap, you can also pick up any extra nodes like this along the way that give you armor that I don't have, and I didn't pick these up because I hit armor cap without them, quite simply. Then we head up to the glyph socket for this starting board, and in here we put in the canny glyph. This gives you bonus non-physical damage for all intelligence you purchase in the radius, as well as an additional bonus sort of secondary effect that puts a debuff that stacks on enemies every time you hit them with non-physical damage, increasing the damage that they take from you for a short duration afterwards. The multiplier in this is also increased non-physical damage, and our main source of damage in the build is Quill Volley, which is lightning damage, so this does affect it entirely. We take the intelligence just enough to actually activate the glyph, we take the rare and magic nodes of relevance within the radius too, but then we exit out the top side of the board and attach on the viscous shield board, which is unbelievably important right now. We go up and left to start with to go through the damage reduction while barriered, rare, and magic nodes, as these are quite important to actually hit, and then we go up to the legendary node itself, which is Viscous Shield. This reads in a way that tells you that it should give you 33% maximum damage if you have full life as barrier. because it gives you 1% extra damage for every 3% maximum life you have as a barrier. However, for whatever reason, this node seems to be scaling based off of base life rather than maximum life. A level 60 character has around 400 base life by default, so let's use that number just for a bit of clarity. If you have 400 base life, but you can raise it to a 5-digit number, which is a thing that we can't do, that is a massive percent increase from this node. I have around 8,000 health right now, so because this is functioning off of that 400 base health damage number, when I have a full barrier for my 8,000 health, it counts me as having 2,000% life as barrier for the purpose of this node. This makes it around a 666% damage multiplier, as opposed to a 33% increase as it's intended to be. This node is insane. It's clearly bugged, it will be fixed, and while it exists, every single Spiritborn build is doing easily more than 10 times as much damage as they would be without this node existing, maybe a little bit more depending on your gear level and how much maximum life bonuses you are able to stack. Moving on then, we take the rare and magic nodes above this for maximum life and armor as well. Again, if you are under armor cap, feel free to grab the extra magic nodes that I didn't get here to help reach it. Then we go to the glyph socket itself, and here we'll be slotting in the fulminate glyph. This increases your lightning damage per intelligence node purchased in the radius. It gives bonus lightning damage to healthy and injured enemies for reaching a dexterity threshold. It's a very weird sort of double threshold. We grab all of the intelligence in the radius as this glyph is super important, and doing so also gets us the required dexterity sort of by default. We grab the rare and relevant magic nodes as well within the radius. Then we head out of the right side of the board here. We'll be attaching on the sapping board like so. You want to head directly towards that legendary node, but first sort of making a couple of stops through the rare and magic resistance to all elements nodes, as well as the maximum life gain, and importantly, the resource generation and bonus maximum resource nodes too, as we've already mentioned how important maximum resource is, and of course, resource generation helps out with keeping our gameplay have an infinite loop as well. We then go over to the Legendaries node itself, which gives you a bonus 30% damage multiplier for 5 seconds every time that you cast 3 skills from the same base spirit in a row. Quill Volley is, of course, actually casting an eagle skill, so when you cast Quill Volley 3 times in a row, you activate this for 5 seconds. We will be casting Quill Volley just all the time. We spam it, you cast it 3 times in a row consistently, definitely more than at least once every 5 seconds, so this is just always active. Then we go down to the other side of the board through the rare and magic nodes. We pick up some all resist and some extra armor. Again, another armor node you could pick up if you aren't at cap from your gear. Then we go through the attack speed rare and magic nodes specifically to get to the glyph socket itself, inside of which here we'll be putting the Menagerist glyph. This gives you a bonus to all magic nodes within the radius, and this is very important for this one, but it also has the additional bonus of giving you a 4% damage bonus for each base spirit skill that you use for 10 seconds, stacking with itself. This is a 16% maximum multiplier if you have all of them active, and we do have one of each skill type on our bar, so we do activate all of these very consistently for the full damage increase. We also then grab the rare node here for just bonus damage because we can, but most importantly, in this radius, you want to activate the glyph, of course, but then pick up the rare and magic maximum resource increase nodes, because these are unbelievably important for the way that the build works and actually stacking the actual damage and reaching the thresholds that you need. So you want to make sure that you pick up those and that they are within the range of this as well, because look at the fact that that gives you 15 maximum resource per magic node, not even the rare one at this stage. Then past that, we want to go back to the Viscous Shield board, and we'll be heading up through the barrier generation, rare and magic node specifically, to the top side of the board, and here we'll be attaching on the Revealing Paragon board. We want to head directly to here through the maximum life and armor gain, rare and magic nodes, and this actual node itself gives you 30% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies, as well as a lucky hit chance up to 30% to knock down vulnerable enemies. This gives you a lot more crowd control, it gives you a lot more ways to just sort of control a fight, and it also helps you apply stagger to bosses, which is pretty important for most builds in the game. Then we go back over to the actual sapping board, and here we'll be going out the top side now to attach on the Convergence board. Here you want to go right over to the glyph socket itself very quickly, and in the glyph socket here we're putting in Spirit, which is one of our most important glyphs. This gives you a ton of critical strike damage for every dexterity node purchased in the radius. It has an additional bonus that gives you a stacking debuff against enemies, so every time that they take a crit from you, they take increased damage up to a 15% maximum. We take both of the rare nodes in the radius, and then we stack a fair bit of dexterity in here, a little bit more than you need, just because the additive bonus from this one is very, very strong. Then we'll be exiting out over here to go up the left side through the all resist and maximum life rare and magic nodes over to the legendary node itself of the board, Convergence. This gives you up to 30% increased total damage, depending on your 2 highest element-specific damage type increases. This means it's not affected by stats like non-physical increase. There isn't really a specific physical damage increase stat either, so that doesn't really help, but there is specifically things like lightning damage increase, which we have a ton of from the Fulminate glyph that we talked about earlier. Our power from the Convergence glyph is entirely funneled through the Fulminate glyph. You need to reach approximately 150% total increased lightning damage from Fulminate between the additive and the multipliers to have this reach its full 30% bonus. That is one of our goals when doing Fulminate, and you reach that when you have Fulminate at around glyph level 60 or so. Then we'll be heading out the left side of the board here to actually reattach to the revealing board. We do this so that we can shorten up the amount of Paragon points it would normally take to traverse the board, and instead now we'll be heading right to the glyph socket here, inside of which we put the Talon glyph. This increases the damage you do with Eagle skills for all dexterity nodes purchased in the radius, and also has an additional bonus that just increases Eagle skill critical strike damage in general, which of course is very strong too. In here we will be grabbing the rare and magic nodes that are relevant, as well as just enough dexterity to actually activate the glyph. If you have more Paragon points than I do, the first changes that I would add are on both of these clusters over here, which are non-physical damage, as well as bonus maximum life, and then also bonus attack speed, because all of those stats are very good for us, they help a lot, and so getting these with a few points is very useful. Past that, if you have more points, of course, feel free to fill in any magic nodes that I've missed in different places that I specifically avoided, but most importantly, you want to fill in a bunch of the actual relevant stats for the glyphs that we have. Spirit, for example, is our highest priority glyph to stack dexterity in, so the next thing you want to do with your points is just get as much dexterity as you can within this radius to increase our additive critical strike damage, which will then increase our damage exponentially due to all of our critical strike damage multipliers. Past that, secondarily, you want to upgrade the actual canny glyph and get all of the intelligence in the radius here to increase our non-physical damage a fair amount as well, because it just scales extremely well. Then the third one that you want to prioritize, if you still have points after that, is actually Talon, which again, you just want to purchase all the dexterity in the radius with your next set of points, and then if you still have points left after that, you just want to pick up the magic nodes that are in the actual radiuses, the good ones like damage to crowd controlled enemies. You can get bonus resistances or maximum physical damage. You can get bonus armor if you want. You can get bonus strength. You can just fill in your stats in general, get bonus damage. There's a lot of things that you can do with those last few points, but this is sort of the priority order of what to do and when. That does it for setting up the build then, so let's talk about how to actually play it, though it is relatively simple. Evade into a pack of mobs to group them up nicely where you land. If you want to keep moving while you fight, you can evade again to vortex them a few meters over at a time until they become unstoppable. Ravager you want to keep active at all times, same with Armored Hide as much as possible too. Scourge you want to use on cooldown as well as the Hunter, mostly for maintaining the Supremacy and Resolution passive effects. Aside from this, you just want to spam Quill Volley. Make sure it hits an enemy if you want it to refund itself, and then you just have the beauty of a ton of evades in the build. A ton of pulls every time you evade, every time that you attack a few times, and just using it manually on the bar, and then you can just fling yourself to whatever part of an area you'd like to be in, and force all of the enemies to join you there until they die. That just about does it for today, everyone. Just my much more crowd control and speed farming focused take on an overpower Quill Volley build, which I like to call Vortex Overquill. How has nobody called this build archetype Overquill before? It's just been sitting right there. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and hopefully you enjoy using it in game too if you try it out. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.